it's Ashley Bookstrom and I am back with another video. Today I'm here to do my final June wrap up. I'm so happy. Usually I say, oh, I can't believe we're halfway. I'm so happy that we're halfway through this year. This year's garbage. So as always with my final wrap-ups, you guys know I do a mid-month wrap-up and a final wrap-up. With my final wrap-ups, I always do my stats. So let's go ahead and jump into the stats for all my lovely viewers out there that love the statistics. So this month I read a total of 18 books with a page count of 5,218 pages. So I read more pages this month than I did last month with less books, but that's because the books were longer. Yes, the books were longer this month. In terms of genre, I read 4 nonfiction, 3 graphic novels, manga, or comics, 1 romance/contemporary, 1 mystery, 6 realistic fiction, 1 paranormal, and 2 science fiction fantasy. For the age breakdown, I read 0 books that are classified as children, 2 middle grade books, 7 YA, and 9 adult. For format, I read 5 physical books, 2 ebooks, and a whopping 11 audio. I did some heavy audio booking this month. For the sources, 4 books were owned, 10 were borrowed from the library. I don't think anybody's surprised. 1 was borrowed from Kindle Unlimited, and 3 I listened to from Libro FM. For the other stats that I keep track of is to make sure that I am reading more diversely. 5 had LGBTQIA+ rep, 1 was translated, 16 out of the 18 were own voices in diverse books. We need to make sure we keep that up. 1 of the books was over 500 pages, 2 were rereads, and 12 were written by Black authors. As you all know, I've already done a mid-month June wrap-up, so I'll make sure I link that in the card symbol above if you want to hear about any of the books that I read earlier this month. I'm not going to talk about those books, but what I will do here is actually just tell you the books that I read, because I don't think I've ever done that. So I'll just go ahead and tell you the books, but if you want to know more about each book individually, I'd recommend checking out that wrap. I read Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall, All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, King and the Dragonflies by Kaysen Callender, Solo by Kwame Alexander, Not So Pure and Simple by Lamar Giles, Nana Volume 5 by Ayazawa, and Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. All right, so let's get into the books that I actually read the second half of June. So the first book that I read in the second half of June was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and this is a book that a lot of people had been reading for the Blackout Buddy Read, and this is a book that solely focuses on the white fragility of white Americans and why they are so scared to talk about race. This book is interesting in that it doesn't provide any new information except the fact that it's coming from a white author. So what I felt about this book is that a lot of the information that she talks about in this book, like the microaggressions that are often faced by Black people, the narrative of I'm a good person so I couldn't possibly be racist or do any harm, the narrative of, well, I feel so emotionally downtrodden by what's happening, so I'm going to cry in front of Black people who are actually experiencing racism. None of this is new. This is just a method I think that she's using because sometimes it's easier to hear information from someone that looks like you, because Black people have definitely been talking about everything in this book for eons. This book was definitely difficult for me to read because DiAngelo talks about a lot of things that I have experienced as a Black person in America, and it was very triggering and it made me relive a lot of those experiences that I've been through. So in a lot of ways I felt like this is not a book for Black people to read, but I think that it is valuable information for white people as well. There are also a lot of conversations going on right now about why this book is actually outselling a lot of anti-racist books that are being written by Black authors, and that is definitely a conversation worth having. And I think it's very important to acknowledge how problematic that is, but I do feel like this book has been an easy gateway and entrance for a lot of white people who are just now starting the conversations about race. And I do feel like this book is important because you have to identify what may be wrong with you before you can even begin to have those conversations about race. And you can't really make change until you start making change within yourself. And I believe that this book serves as a very important reminder of that narrative. I personally did not feel comfortable rating this book, considering that this book was not written for me. D'Angelo makes that very clear in the beginning that this book is written by a white person for white people. So as a black person, I really didn't gain anything out of it, and I did not feel comfortable rating a book that I knew straight out was not for me, because I was going to have certain perceptions and thoughts about it because it wasn't there for me at all. I could have said that this book was really dumbed down and washed out, and that it didn't really hit topics in a complex way, but that wasn't her intention, and I completely understand that. So for the first time in the history of me ever having this channel on Goodreads, I didn't rate this book. The next book that I read was Check Please by Ngozi Ukazu, and this is such a cute graphic novel. I know that a lot of people have been telling me in the comments that they've read Check Please and that they really enjoyed it, that it was a cute contemporary graphic novel, and I completely agree. This book is about a main character named Biddy who has moved from his hometown of Georgia to a new state to go to school, and he decides that he's going to play on the hockey team, but he is this vlogger extraordinaire and patisserie extraordinaire. And what I really liked about this book was the friendships that were present here. I think that Biddy is so supportive of his teammates, and his teammates are so supportive of him, especially since he had a hard time adjusting from being a figure skater to being a hockey player, and learning the terminology and learning what it means to be checked and getting over that fear of being checked. And I think that they were so supportive of each other. I know that it may seem like this is all light and fluffy, but there are some conflicts in this book, and I think that the author does a brilliant job in resolving any conflicts that do arise. But I love the romance in this, the unsuspecting romance that happened in this. There are some difficult topics that are covered in terms of parental and child relationships, but I do think that this was a great palate cleanser after reading some pretty difficult books with some pretty difficult themes all month long. I really needed something light like this, light in the sense that not like it was whimsical, but light in the sense that I was smiling and was happy reading this book. I loved Biddy, I loved Jack, I loved everybody. The artwork is beautiful. I love that there was so much detail in each panel, and I also love that there were aspects of this book that actually there were frames and panels that had no words, and the artwork was so detailed and so well done that the reader still knew exactly what was going on, even if it didn't contain any words in it. I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars, and I cannot wait to pick up the next book in the series. After picking that up, I decided to go with another tough read, and I finished White Rage by Carol Anderson. This book should be required reading in all colleges, universities, high schools. It is the untold history of America, and where White Fragility is more so about recognizing your individual biases and your individual issues that you may have caused, White Rage teaches you about the history that has caused so many issues for Black people. And Carol Anderson's main goal of this book was to say that a lot of why Black people have not been able to move forward is because of white rage, because white people don't want to see, and not all white people, but some white people don't want to see Black people move forward. And they have been able to do this historically, not by being overtly racist and by using things like the N-word or saying I hate all Black people, but by using laws and policies to withhold an entire group of people from being able to successfully move forward and advance. It is a very difficult book to read, but it is an eye-opening book for those who have never been taught the other side of history. So I always like to say that there's two sides of history, and the ones who write the history books are also the ones who the ones who win the wars. So you don't always get a full perspective of what really happens historically. A lot of people who have read this book probably didn't know that the 13th Amendment actually has a loophole that has created this system and funnel of pipeline incarceration. There's a loophole in the 13th Amendment that does that. A lot of people don't realize that there were aspects of the 15th Amendment that weren't ratified in some states until as late as 2013. This book is that historical piece that I think everybody in America needs to be aware of, because a lot of times we like to hide our history and forget certain aspects and glorify certain people, aka Lincoln, for certain things that they may or may not have done without telling the other side of the story, because we want things to look neat, and they're really not that neat. They're really not that nice. They're not pieces that you can put into a box and tie and put a bow on top of it. It is a difficult book to read. There were aspects of it that were not just triggering for me, but just to see how badly my people have been treated throughout history. And some of this stuff I was already aware of because my dad was very adamant about teaching me the other side of history. He often negated a lot of what I was taught in school, but there were some things that I just wasn't as familiar with, some things that I didn't even realize were done by some presidents that were extremely harmful. There was this whole section that talked about Reagan and how this whole system of how crack was introduced to the Black community, and how he left office with one of the highest approval ratings in American presidential history, and it completely blew my mind away and pissed me off. So this book it's dense. You should read it slow. I think that it is one that needs to be, like I said, taught in schools, but it's not one that you sit down and you casually read. And I think I only ended up giving this one 4 stars because it is marketed, I think, as a anti-racist book, but it's not accessible to everyone. And I think that that's something that needs to be stated, that the accessibility of this book, it's not there, and it's not meant to be there. It's not meant to be a starter book, but it definitely is not accessible. The next book that I read is Anger is a Gift by Mark Oshiro, and this is one of my favorites of 2020. I talked about this in my mid-year book freakout tag and said that it was one of my favorites, and this, I literally ugly cried in this book. I don't ever do that, but this book broke me. I will say it over and over again that this book broke me, but it's such a pivotal book. It is a book about a young boy by the name of Moss. His father was killed 6 years prior to the events of this book, and he has dealt with a lot of trauma related to his father dying because of police brutality, and how the media has made him out to be this complete villain. And then what ends up happening is when he goes to school, there ends up being a police presence in their school. They do some really horrific things like put metal detectors and do random locker searches, and there ends up being this conflict between the students and this police presence, and some horrible things end up happening as a result of this police presence. And it's amazing because the conversation is around the fact of, why are we policing these schools that are predominantly Black or have predominantly kids of color? We're labeling these kids as troublemakers, as ill-wanted beings of society, and it's wrong. And to have a police presence like that in a school and to treat these kids like they're criminals is crazy to me. It is crazy to me. I'm all about school safety, but there's a thin line between school safety and policing a school like they did in this book, to the point that you are creating these images and perceptions of these kids that are not true in the least bit. These kids are treated like they're criminals, they're animals. It was so tough to watch because I know that in other schools where the schools are predominantly white, and it's kind of touched on in this book, they don't go through the same things. Those schools end up being predominantly white because of things like gerrymandering. So they are intentionally segregating these schools where most of the kids of color end up at one school, and they're getting less funding. They don't have access to as many materials. Their teachers are worn out and burnt out, and it it touches on so much. It touches on all of that. It touches on police brutality. It just was such a beautiful novel. It was so beautiful. And you see this development of Moss as a character, from just living in his blackness and being at this school to identifying as gay. And let me tell you, the rep in this book, amazing. I mean, I feel like everybody was, and it wasn't tokenized. It didn't feel tokenized. It didn't feel like people were just being thrown in this book because they're being put into this book. It felt very real. So there was rep, there was a bisexual character, a lesbian character, gay character, non-binary character, and then there were kids from different backgrounds. You have black kids, kid from Guatemala, and just there's white kids, and it was just so beautiful to see such a diverse cast of people, and then to see the issues that Mark was willing to touch on. And I think a lot of times he was able to beautifully discuss this topic that I think often goes unseen when we talk about police brutality. We don't talk about how a lot of this stuff affects our kids in school and how our kids are labeled at such an early age. Our kids of color are labeled and discriminated against even in their schools, and their school's supposed to be their safe space. So that in essence right there is problematic. But I know that a lot of these kids that go to predominantly black or predominantly schools where there's lots of kids of color, they go through these same issues. They're not valued, they're not cared about, they're not heard, they're not listened. And it is so heartbreaking, because even for me, having a child, I often have to think, like, do I want to send my child to a predominantly white school where I know the kids are getting more funding, but then have to worry about her being afraid to share her blackness and be proud of being black, or send her to a predominantly black school where I know that she will be okay with being able to exude her confidence in being black, but then I have to worry about her not having access to the same materials and the same information and knowledge as her white counterparts. So this book was just a conglomeration of emotional like feels for me, because it was just so well written. I thought the audiobook was so long. It was so long. It felt super, super long, but I think it was just, it wasn't long in a bad way. It was just beautiful. Everything about it was beautiful. The event that happened in the book that hurt, that broke my heart, I thought one thing was happening, and then it happened, and I was like, wait, what? And then I had to rewind it, and I was like, no, that didn't happen. And it happened, and then like I was driving to go pick up my daughter, and I was holding onto the steering wheel crying. Not even just like the small tear, but like bawling, because I just couldn't believe that this was happening to these kids. Children. I mean, granted, they're like high school kids, so you know, at high school you think you're grown, but you know, as an adult, it's like they're still kids, and it's not fair for them to have to be treated the way that they were treated. But anyway, yep, I ended up giving that one 5 out of 5 stars. If you have not read Anger is a Gift, and the title is important, using that anger, your anger is your gift, because with your anger you can make a change. Oh gosh, that book was just, oh gosh, that book was everything and more. The next book that I ended up finishing was I Can Make This Promise by Christine Day, and I read this for Voltathon. And this book is about a young girl by the name of Edie, and Edie, I think I just read a lot of books that deal with like kids going through some really crappy things. Edie deals with, in the very beginning, in the opening pages, a teacher asked her, "What are you?" And basically she says her name, and the teacher is like, "No, but where are you originally from?" And she tells her Seattle, and then the teacher is like, "No, but where do your parents come from?" So it's one of those things where it's like, that was the first couple of pages, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this little girl is having to go through someone asking her like, "No, what are you?" Like, no, like, but where did you really come from? And I was like, dang. But this book essentially is about Edie's journey to figuring out more about her Native American heritage, because her mom is adopted and she knows that her mom has Native American roots, but she doesn't talk about it, and she doesn't know anything about it until she finds something in their attic with a woman who has the same name as her, and she's on this discovery to figure out more about where this woman came from, how she's related to her, what it means to have Native American heritage. And what I loved most about this book was that it talked about some real life experiences, some real life laws, like protection laws that I did not even know were out there. Certain things that Native Americans have experienced living here in America. And I think I said this in like one of my vlogs. I am always like a huge advocate for reading diverse books, reading own voices. I'm definitely a huge advocate for reading Black books and understanding more about the Black experience. But I too could also educate myself about other experience that other marginalized groups have experienced here in America. And this is definitely a book that turned me on to learning some stuff that I did not know. I ended up watching the live show that they ended up having for this book, and I was recommended to watch the documentary Engine, and I definitely plan on watching that because I learned a lot from this book. I felt for the emotional journey that Edie had to go through. I felt for the emotional pain that her mother had to tell her about what it really means to be Native American and how they have been treated because of the way that they look and the gross history that this country has with Native Americans. And it was also an emotional hit, not as much as Anger is a Gift, because I don't think Christine Day went into as much detail, but I can say that I learned a lot. I did like the exploration of the friendship that Edie had with two characters in this book. I think that Christine Day could have gone a little bit further with discussing one relationship in particular, but other than that, I really did enjoy it. This prompted me to look for more books that have Native American or Indigenous representation, and I'm going to be reading one this month. But if you've never read this book, I highly recommend checking this out, and props to Margaret and her team for using this book as the group read, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5. The next book that I read was Four Letter Word, which is the first book in the After Hours series by Ava Freeman. And this is a sapphic romance book that I read for Queer Blackathon. Unfortunately, this was the only book that I was able to get to that weekend, but I really enjoyed this. This is an office place romance where Anas, I think that's how you say her name, and Maya end up working together, and there's clearly an attraction between the two of them, but they kind of tiptoe around giving in to that attraction, and it just is about their journey and to kind of getting to know each other and developing that romance. This was really short. It was only like 60 something pages. It's a novella, but it was so good. It was so steamy. It was so hot. And I really enjoyed all of it. I can't wait to read the next book in the series, and I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Almost American Girl by Robin Ha, which is a nonfiction graphic memoir about Robin Ha's experience moving with her single mother from Seoul, South Korea to Alabama. And my God, she does I mean, it's her story, and this is a great On Voices book, but she just does such a great job visually depicting her experiences, not only moving from South Korea as just an immigrant, but then the racial experiences that she has moving to Alabama. She does such a great job not only talking about her experiences moving as an immigrant from South Korea to America, but also her experiences in the racial tension and discrimination that she faces when she gets to Alabama. And this really just, it's brilliantly done because it is a graphic work. So she doesn't have an excess space of words to describe her experiences, but she does such a great job. And I was just so heartbroken reading a lot of parts of this book because she has this language barrier with her family members in Alabama that are Korean American, whereas she's coming from South Korea. She doesn't speak English. There's these cultural barriers. So even dealing with people who come from the same ethnicity or race as you find out that you can't even relate to them because then there's a cultural barrier there. And then she goes to school and then she has kids who are making fun of her because of the fact that she is Korean. And I think that it was such a twofold experience, and she just had to deal with a lot of issues because it was a twofold experience. I think what I also loved is this experience that she had with her mom, who is a single mother, and she talks about the cultural stereotypes and the cultural impression that exists for Korean women who are still in South Korea, and how her mother had to work so hard and had to lie to keep them safe because there wasn't a man around. And while I don't have that same issue, I do deal with those stereotypes and that concept of living in the deep South and being a single parent and not married. And it is very, very frustrating, but her mom had to pack up and move from one country to another to try to give herself and her daughter a better opportunity because it just wasn't really safe anymore for their mental health and for their physical and emotional well-being to remain in a place where her mother was basically looked down upon so much. And Robin Ha has to come to terms with that when she eventually does make her way back to South Korea. And I love that she was very honest and transparent about their relationship as their mother-daughter relationship, and about the relationship that she had with herself and her own culture. It was just really brilliantly done. If you're looking for an own voices nonfiction graphic memoir, I definitely would recommend checking this one out, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is one that I listened to, and it is A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney. This has been pitched as a Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Alice in Wonderland, and while I agree with that, I had some issues with this book. I did not enjoy it as much as I wanted to. I think the pacing of this book was really, really off. It is about a young girl by the name of Alice who loses her father. Not a spoiler, it's at the very, very beginning of the book. And someone comes to save her, and then she gets pulled into this dream world where there are these dreams that manifest off of people's sadness, and these monsters come about. And the pacing was off to me because L.L. McKinney doesn't do a good job of world building. And I think that because she doesn't do a good job of world building, she throws her readers into this world and it kind of builds the world up as the novel continues, but doesn't really give the reader much chance to catch up. So a lot of the beginning of the book, I think readers spend a lot of time confused. I know that I did. I am interested in more of this world because it is a play off of Alice in Wonderland, but Alice is supposed to be more like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But I think that because the beginning was so jarring and that it didn't explore a lot of what I think should have been explored in the beginning of a fantasy novel, it really threw me off. I also did not like that L.L. McKinney never addressed the trauma of losing her father, especially when this world is so built off of emotional responses from humans. And it's almost like she killed off her father in the first page and then never really addresses it for the rest of the book. And to me, that was a huge problem. What was a saving grace for this book was the fact that I'm so interested in the fantasy, and I also love the relationship that Alice had with her mom. She kept it very much so like a real relationship between a Black mom and her child, and I related to a lot of that because it honestly reminded me of the relationship that I even have with my own mother. I do love that she allowed Alice to be herself. She didn't change the narrative of Alice being a Black character in a YA fantasy book. It literally grinds my gears when we have Black characters who end up being whitewashed. She allowed Alice to use AAVE, and she never lost touch of anything that was related to her Black heritage and Black culture, and I really, really appreciated. I also think that McKinney has a very distinctive writing style that does come across as kind of choppy. So it's one of those writing styles that you're either going to hate or love, and it was kind of unorganized for me, so it wasn't my favorite. I'm really interested in seeing where this world building is going to go. So I may pick up the second book, but I will say that it's not high on my priority list. So I only ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I have already done a full review on this one, which went up yesterday. So I'll make sure that I link that in the card symbol above for you all to check out. And of course, I ended up giving this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I read was A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow. And I can't say anything about this book. Y'all are gonna hate me for that, but I can't say anything about this book because this book is part of a project that I'm working on that'll come out about the 3rd week of July. So you'll hear more of my thoughts on this one then, but I did end up giving it 3.75 stars. I'm sorry, y'all. I know some people probably want to hear my thoughts, but you will hear them soon, I promise. And the last book is another book that I'm not going to talk about a lot, and that is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. I am doing a reread. I'm part of the live show, which by the time this video goes up, the live show has already happened. So I'll make sure I'll link the live show down below on Bethany's channel. But yeah, I gave this 1 star. It's super problematic. I think that Edward is a stalker and borderline abusive. So those are my thoughts. I will be doing a full review of this one and New Moon, so be on the lookout for this. I'm not going to delve much into it. I know a lot of people have read Twilight. I know a lot of you are looking forward to my thoughts, but that should give you, from the live show and Hear Me Now, that should give you a glimpse of how my review is going to turn out. All right, y'all, so that is it for my June wrap up. I hope you all have enjoyed. Let me know what you ended up reading in the month of June. Let me know if you have anything that you want me to try out. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button. I upload every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you're interested in following me on social media, all the links will be down in the description box, and I'll be back with another video soon.